Hi there. So I want to share um, a little bit about the fascia and why it's such a useful concept in the context of the path to enlightenment or health, wellness, productivity, et cetera, all the way to enlightenment. So I first discovered the relevance of the fascia when I ended up with a number of injuries. So I had fractured two ribs in my neck from a car accident. I had a low back injury when I was 16 from like really poor posture for really long hours, long days. And then I had torn an ACL skiing. And so I had injured pretty much every joint. Um, and, I had various problems. And I was on so many painkillers for my back pain that I ended up with an ulcer at one point because of the ibuprofen. So I had to stop taking NCS. Anyway, and when I was commuting at one point, from Chicago to San Francisco every week for my work at Google in the beginning, I ended up pulling a muscle in my neck from pulling like the back from the top, and I wasn't exercising as much, and I wasn't, and so basically I had severe pain in my neck, really worried about traveling. So I started looking for a personal trainer or a physical therapist to help me so that I, could travel. And the first thing that he said to me was, he sent me a couple of videos, and he said, if you have a tennis ball or a racquetball at home, use that and do some of these videos. It might help to provide some relief before I see you later in the day. So, and the videos, interestingly, was like to take the tennis or tennis or racquetball, and first to roll my feet, the bottom of my feet, and then it was the calf. And then I noticed I had to get up and do something. I noticed 50% of my pain in my neck had reduced, and I thought, oh, that's a weird coincidence. So I did the rest of the exercises, and all of it went away. And then, of course, it came back the next morning when I went to go see him. And what he then educated me on was this concept of the fascia. And what he said was like, it's basically, and I learned this, I ended up getting training in myofascial release, which I'll also share here, but it's a massage technique that that focuses on the fascia, and I'll share it in this context. So essentially, what I learned from that one personal trainer first was, or that physical therapist, he's both, was that I might have pain in my neck, but the way that originates maybe because I'm, my feet, I'm like using them so much from walking for years and years. I have knots on my feet, and the fascia, you can think of, it's like in anatomy, they used to think it was filler material when you open the body, because it's everywhere, but it actually has a function, and they believe that so let me, before I get into that belief system, I'm going to say what he was sharing with me. So what he shared was that, because of the fascia, everything's connected. So let's say I end up with I'm working my feet, I'm trying to build some knots or tightness in my feet. Then it starts pulling on my calf muscles. Maybe I start to form some knots here. Then it's my low back that's getting pulled on. After 40 years then, right, my neck's bothering me. But I can work on the neck, but because the root cause might be a knot that's in my calf that's pulling everything that pulls on my neck, it keeps coming back until I work on the root cause. So what I started discovering was I started hunting for these knots, and I knew that if I removed the knot in my calf, my foot, or my hamstring, my low back pain or my neck pain would reduce or go away. So it became like gold. I started traveling with these yoga balls everywhere. I stopped taking painkillers altogether, and it was so empowering because I realized I can find the root cause of my pain, physical pain in many cases, just by hunting for these knots. So it started to become this joy of hunting for the knot. And sometimes the knots are really deep or really intense, and I'd have to go near it. I couldn't go right into the center of it. And then when I would release it, the layers beneath it, he said sometimes you might even feel worse right away before it gets better because you've now taken off the superficial layer, and now the deeper knots are under the surface a little bit in the fascia. So basically it became like I started working these layers, and when I went to the places of pain, the tightness, the system would heal, the physical system would heal. And so, this I started learning, and this goes back to this technique of Vipassana, equanimity sensation. Started to become like when I would breathe into it, right? So when I try to melt these knots, one of the things he was teaching me was, you can't be like tensed up. You're not going to be able to dissolve the knot. You have to kind of breathe and melt into it, and it's like be able to move through the pain with equanimity. Don't suffer. If you're suffering and I'm like, right, I'm going into a version of fight or flight and I'm tensing up, I'm not going to be able to remove that knot. It just gets bigger, just like a sankara in the system. It gets bigger if I react. But if I just observe it, or just like relax into it, soften into it, then I can start to like release it from the system. So, and in the context of Vipassana and sankaras, any habit pattern I have that comes from aversion or craving, the way it manifests in the system is mental and physical rigidity, knots that turn into injury, illness, and disease over time. So essentially that knot in my system is tied to some trauma, some habit pattern, some kara in my system. So melting it is going to be like, I have to be able to like move through with equanimity if I want to let it leave my system. Okay, so then I discovered, so that became a game changer in my life. And the yoga balls, I'll include a link if you want to get the yoga balls, but they're like, and a couple of videos to use them. They're amazing. I've shared them with like anyone that's interested in trying to heal physical ailment. It's not like a magic bullet, right? Like you have to like work it over time, and there are layers of what you have to work through. But it was a game changer for me for a lot of the different kinds of pains that I had. Okay, so then myofascial release. So myofascial release is basically MFR. It was a technique that I learned, I experienced with some of the Google massage therapists. And so I took the training, and I got certified in it because I was just so intrigued and amazed by how well it worked. But essentially, this is how it works. Essentially, it's like, so the philosophy is that you can think of the fascia as almost like a Superman suit. Like if I was wearing, and it's like a fully fitted suit, right? Spider-Man suit. And imagine that I were to tie a knot on the right side of that suit. So then you might see wrinkles across my left shoulder and down to my right toe. So that's how you can think of the fascia. The fascia is like it's a liquid crystalline matrix that goes through everything, organs and tissues and bones and muscles and whatever. It's like the glue. It's in everything. It's holding it all together, essentially. And so, and you can think of it like this liquid crystalline fitted suit. So now, if I get, and it's liquid crystalline. If there's any trauma, physical, emotional, psychological, that spot where it registered as trauma will become solid. It'll become rock instead of liquid. So essentially, imagine I would get into a car accident and I injured my right hip. I form fascial restriction, it becomes solid instead of liquid. And now it's a knot in this spot, so maybe it's pulling on my left shoulder and down on my right toe. And then maybe over time, because my shoulder's not getting pulled by this restriction, I start, leaning a little bit to the right. Or sorry, let me do it the other way, because it's a knot, right? Maybe I lean a little bit to the right because it's constricting it. And it doesn't want me to relive the trauma, so it doesn't ever want me to go into that position again, because that would reliving the trauma, basically, right? So let's say in an exaggerated sense, I'm like leaning this way. Now I'm pulling on a muscle here, so maybe my left hip starts to bother me, my left knee, and then that cascades, and pretty soon I need a knee replacement or hip replacement. It seems like it came out of the blue. Well, it didn't come out of the blue. It was like over time, so even when a kid falls on their butt when they're little, and they end up with a fascial restriction on their butt, that can pull on your head, and you end up with migraines. So there are all these implications, and John Barnes was healing all kinds of, physical, even mental, injury, illness, disease by releasing the fascia. And what they taught us in the technique was you didn't have to go very deep because the fascia is right under the surface. So just really kind of light. And the key was to stretch the fascia and then hold it. And the key here was we had to hold it for like 5 minutes, like set a timer because it felt like an eternity. And the way they describe the fascia is it's like taffy. So if you pull taffy, it's going to spring right back. But if you hold it for 5 minutes, it'll start to unwind. It loses its elasticity, starts to unwind. And that's what happens to the fascia. So if you hold it for the 5 minutes, then it'll start to unwind. And they say that it unwinds in the order that you experience trauma. It starts to unwind. So people even claim to go all the way back to their birth, and they believe it, then even past lives and so on. But anyway, and the key is to maintain that pressure. And it starts feeling like melting butter, is how they described it. And you maintain the stretch so that you can keep unwinding. And what's amazing is when they taught it to us is you can start anywhere. So when I took it, like the first day, people start working on different spots. And they said you can start anywhere because what the body will then tell you is where to go next. So let's say it was my hip. Let's say I'm complaining about let's say a shoulder problem. So you start on the shoulder because that feels natural to the person. But then you'll see something release, and maybe I twitch on my right hip. So then I'm drawn to my right hip. Then maybe my right toe you see twitching. And then I go. So if we saw heat, redness, twitching, or the person told us they felt something somewhere, that would be the next place that we might go. So it becomes like the map. The body will become the map. It'll tell you where to go next. Well, when I took the course, I was blown away because in the first class, so we were practicing on each other. They would tell us about a few places and things to try. Then we'd go and do it on each other in pairs. And then we'd go back and so on. And on the first day, I remember it was like little twitches were releasing in different places, right? Little fascia. And then by the second day, that's when we started having much larger releases. And at one point I started sobbing. I don't even know what I was crying about, and was releasing all this stuff. I had a really bad leg injury that went away. There was a woman that I was working on that was reliving, she said, she was reliving her gallbladder surgery. She could hear the doctors and she was like in tears. And then she said the pain she had went away. So there were all kinds, like people were like having all kinds of reactions and releasing all kinds of stuff from their system. And essentially the way they described it was like, imagine someone was jumping off a cliff, okay? So as they're falling, let's say the body now, it's like taking a picture. It captures the snapshot of the trauma. So now whatever the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the movement even, the speed they're moving at, all register in the fascia as that trauma. And then when you release it, they can, like when they're unwinding, those can release. So John Barnes would talk about how people would start moving at really fast speeds because they were in a car accident when the trauma occurred. So you'd have to have 4 people there to like make sure they didn't fly off the table. And he demoed it with people, and it looked like an exorcism. It looked like they were like, moving in all kinds of weird ways. And I was skeptical, honestly, so I volunteered. And then I experienced that moving through me, which was wild and amazing. And I found it to be one of the most powerful techniques for healing and releasing trauma from the system. Coincidentally, in Chinese medicine, they say that it's the meridians where energy flows along. If you have blocks in that, that's where you end up with all kinds of physical, mental ailments. Runs along the fascia. So all of these systems, it's really cool to see how they converge. So if you, if you want to get down the path of, all of these benefits, health, wellness, productivity, relationships, enlightenment, fascia is key because that's where the trauma, that's where the sankharas store in the physical mental structure. And so some of these techniques, you may not be willing or able to go to a 10-day silent retreat to start doing this technique. And maybe you want to do other things to help accelerate the process, which is what I learned. So you can start with these things. You can do yoga balls. You can go to MFR therapists in order to have them help you release your sankharas. Because what they basically said was, when I'm putting my hands on that person, I'm basically using my concentration and my, let's say, groundedness or my level of like healing is going to directly affect how much I can melt their knots. So as I was becoming more aware, more conscious in Vipassana, I was getting to deeper theta levels. I was able to melt and heal more in my body. Well, you can do this for other people then too. This is healing. So the more that I've gotten into, I can get into a deeper theta state, the more healing I can do for someone else. So essentially then, the therapist, the state they're in, and then the client, so what they would teach us is if both of you focus and try to calm, get into deeper theta states, it'll be even that much more powerful in the healing for that particular person. And what they say is that you could also think of it as like imparting like thermal energy to melt the knot. There are different ways to think about it. Essentially, that's the concept. And it's the exact same thing that I was learning in releasing knots or melting these sankharas, these rigidities, these traumas in the fascia, in the system when I was in Vipassana. And I was able to heal then. The deeper awareness I was able to go, the more rigid knots I was able to or bigger knots or bigger injury and illness, I was able to melt and release and then heal. And there's one last thing I was going to mention. Oh, right. So the thing that I remember when I was doing MFR therapy, or massage with it, one of the things was when I was training, I realized was it was almost like you could almost think of volcanic rock, right? There's so many traumas and so much hardened layers of the rocky layers of this trauma, or these in the fascia, that you have all this rigidity, right? You have all these and as you get older, that was the thing. As you age, we get more and more rigid. We become more fixed in our mindsets and our ways of being. Well, sure, there's some of that. The body's going to break down over time. You're going to eventually die. But I think a lot of that we can actually reduce or remove or slow down because some of it comes from our own trauma that's building up over time in our system, and we're becoming increasingly rigid and ending up with more and more injury, illness, and disease. So these techniques can also reverse and reduce aging, which I think is incredible. And that's what I've experienced. Like when I was in Vipassana, I remember I've lost a lot of mobility in my feet and they were very rigid. And I would have to be really careful because a little rock, I would twist my ankle on even a little rock because I didn't have much stability. And then as I was removing the knots and getting deeper theta states and able to melt more knots like butter, after a few days, I didn't even need my flashlight. I could walk on any terrain. I felt very resilient and nimble, flexible, and I had more range of motion. So I was literally experiencing that for myself. But what I found was that you can imagine almost like volcanic rock. And as we started releasing different spots on the body, it was almost like little vent holes that steam could release out of, right? There's all this steam in there. And then essentially the system, when enough vent holes are released, it can release all of it and it moves, right? And it can release, it starts exponential tipping point. So that's part of what I experienced and what I wanted to share about the fascia. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.